On January 11, 1942, at approximately 0800 hours, the Japanese 65th Brigade launched a coordinated assault against the Abukai defensive line on the Bataan Peninsula in the Philippines. Their objective was the 57th Infantry Regiment, Philippine Scouts, holding the critical lowland sector flanking the only major road into the peninsula. The 57th Infantry was among the most professional units under General Douglas MacArthur's command. Unlike hastily mobilized Philippine Army divisions, the Scouts were regular United States Army soldiers, Filipino enlisted men with American officers, years of training, and expert marksmanship. They had been engaged in combat since the Japanese invasion began 4 weeks earlier, exhausted, running low on rations for 2 weeks, and facing disease, malaria and dysentery, but remained professional soldiers. On the morning of January 11, they were about to demonstrate why they were considered the backbone of American defense in the Philippines. The challenge for defenders across Bataan was simple arithmetic. The Japanese had overwhelming numbers. They could mass forces, launch human wave attacks, and overwhelm positions through sheer volume. American and Filipino forces were outnumbered 3-1. To hold, defenders needed every advantage possible. Firepower was the most crucial, the ability to deliver enough bullets downrange to stop an attack before it reached their positions. That depended on their weapons. Most American units in the Philippines carried M1903 Springfield rifles, bolt action, 5 rounds, manually operated. To fire again, the bolt handle had to be lifted, pulled back, pushed forward, and lowered, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a new round. This motion broke the sight picture and required target reacquisition. A trained rifleman could fire 15 to 20 aimed shots per minute, sufficient for long-range shooting, but inadequate in close combat or jungle fighting when Japanese soldiers charged across 100 yards. The Japanese carried Type 99 Arisaka rifles, also bolt action, 5 rounds, same mechanical limitations, but Japanese tactics compensated. They employed mass charges, bonsai attacks, and overwhelming numbers to defeat defenders before they could fire enough rounds. This tactic had repeatedly succeeded across Bataan in December and early January. American positions fell not due to lack of courage but because defenders could not deliver firepower fast enough. Some units had a different weapon, the M1 Garand, a semi-automatic, gas-operated rifle firing the .30-06 Springfield cartridge, weighing 9.5 pounds, 43.6 inches long. The rifle fired, ejected the spent round, and chambered the next automatically. Soldiers only needed to pull the trigger, maintaining continuous fire without breaking their sight picture. The rate of fire difference was dramatic. A trained soldier with an M1 Garand could fire 40 to 50 aimed shots per minute, triple the rate of a bolt-action rifle. That difference could determine whether an attack was stopped or positions were overrun. The M1 Garand had been adopted as standard issue in 1936, but by December 1941, the Army had only about 200,000 rifles, not enough to equip every unit. Priority went to units training in the United States, then those deploying to Europe, followed by Hawaii. The Philippines received partial allocations. The 57th Infantry Regiment received M1 Garands for some companies, not all, but enough that when the Japanese attacked on January 11, some scouts carried semi-automatic rifles while most defenders still had Springfields. The 57th had been in continuous contact with Japanese forces since late December, conducting delaying actions near Lingayen Gulf and covering the withdrawal of other units to Bataan. They suffered casualties and gave ground when necessary, but inflicted heavy losses on advancing Japanese troops. Japanese commanders learned to respect the scouts. These were not poorly trained Philippine Army reservists who broke and ran. These were professional soldiers who knew how to shoot, maneuver, and hold ground. Attacking scout positions was costly. On January 9, the Japanese launched their first major assault on the Abukai line. The 57th held the critical lowland sector flanking the main road. If breached, the Japanese could drive straight down the peninsula, cutting off all forces north of the breakthrough. The scouts had to hold. For 2 days, they repelled probing attacks. Then, on January 11, the Japanese committed everything to a major assault. The 65th Brigade, veteran troops experienced in jungle fighting and confident from prior victories in Southeast Asia, attacked in waves, hundreds advancing through jungle terrain, using cover, moving with disciplined infantry tactics. The scouts opened fire at 150 yards. The sound was unlike previous engagements. It was not the measured crack of bolt-action rifles fired carefully, one shot at a time. This was sustained, rapid, continuous fire, like a rolling drumbeat. The Japanese advance stalled. Men dove for cover. Officers searched for machine gun positions. The fire came from individual foxholes, single soldiers, but the rate of fire was unmatched by bolt-action rifles. One man with a Springfield could not maintain that tempo. The Japanese attempted to advance again with the same result. Continuous fire, men falling, attacks fragmenting. Units pulled back to regroup and attempted flanking maneuvers, but the fire shifted seamlessly to meet them. No gaps, no pauses. The defenders reloaded too quickly for Japanese forces to exploit. Japanese officers, familiar with American tactics and Springfield timing, knew how to press assaults during reloading cycles, but these defenders broke that pattern, maintaining continuous fire. By mid-morning, the Japanese attack had fully stalled. The 65th Brigade suffered heavy casualties and withdrew. The Abukai line held. The scouts had repelled a brigade-level assault with only a fraction of the Japanese force. The difference was firepower. The M1 Garand, Colonel Philip T. Fry, commanding the 57th Infantry Regiment from January 21 to 29, 1942, had served with the regiment for years and knew his men and their weapons. After observing the scouts' performance with M1 Garands, he reported to higher command on the rifle's effectiveness, famously stating, "The firepower of a battalion armed with modern weapons is something. The Garand rifle is beyond my descriptive powers." That quote captured what everyone witnessing M1 Garands in combat immediately understood: the rifle fundamentally changed infantry fighting, distributing lethal firepower across the line. One soldier with a Garand delivered firepower equivalent to 2 or 3 men with bolt-action rifles, multiplying overall effectiveness. However, there were not enough Garands to equip every unit. Production in the United States was increasing, but demand far outpaced supply. The Army was transitioning from Springfields to Garands. Every unit wanted them. MacArthur had requested 84,500 minutes and 1 second in August 1941 but received only partial allocations before the Japanese invasion cut off resupply. The Philippine Department received roughly 3,000 minutes and 1 second, prioritized to the best units first: the Philippine Division, the 57th Infantry, the 45th Infantry, those who could use them most effectively. Even within these units, most soldiers still carried Springfields. Frontline infantry received Garands first. Support units retained bolt actions. The scarcity created an underground economy. Soldiers with Garands became targets for acquisition, rifles were hoarded, and officers often found requisitioned weapons missing the next morning. The black market value of an M1 Garand on Baton in January 1942 exceeded a month's pay. Some soldiers traded them for extra rations or medicine. Most refused at any price. They knew what they had: a weapon that might keep them alive. The production challenge facing the United States in 1941 and 42 was immense. Springfield Armory could produce maybe 40,000 minutes and 1 second per year working at full capacity. That wasn't nearly enough. The Army was expanding rapidly. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers needed rifles. The Army still had millions of Springfield bolt actions in storage from World War I, and those could be issued immediately. But the M1 was clearly superior. Military planners wanted every soldier equipped with Garands as soon as possible. Winchester repeating arms was brought into M1 production in 1941. Winchester was a major firearms manufacturer with extensive facilities, but they needed time to retool production lines for the Grand. The rifle was complex. It required different machinery and different processes than Winchester's existing products. Engineers from Springfield Armory traveled to Winchester to help set up production. They brought blueprints, specifications, sample parts, and tooling diagrams. Winchester workers had to be trained on the new rifle. Machinists had to learn new tolerances. Inspectors had to learn new standards. Winchester's first M1S came off the production line in early 1941. Initial production was slow as workers learned the process, but by mid-1941, Winchester was producing thousands of M1S per month. By late 1942, Winchester production matched Springfield Armory. Together, the two facilities were building perhaps 100,000 minutes and 1 second per month. That still wasn't enough to equip every unit immediately, but it was enough to begin systematic distribution. Distribution priority was a constant source of friction. Every unit wanted M1S training divisions in the United States argued they needed them to properly prepare soldiers for combat. Units deploying to Europe argued they needed them because they were going into combat immediately. Units deploying to the Pacific made the same argument. Units already overseas argued they needed the most because they were already fighting. MacArthur in the Philippines requested 84,500 minutes and 1 second in August 1941, 3 months before the Japanese invasion. He was told production limitations made that impossible. He received partial allocations through the fall. Maybe 3,000 rifles total reached the Philippines before December. Those went to the best units: the Philippine Division, the Scouts, Professional soldiers who could use them most effectively. Second Lieutenant Alexander Art Ninier Jr. was assigned to the 57th Infantry Regiment in November 1941, fresh from West Point, class of 1941, 23 years old, posted to the Philippines just weeks before the war started. On January 12, 1942, Nininger's company was not engaged in heavy combat. Another unit nearby was under attack. Nininger voluntarily attached himself to that unit. He grabbed his rifle and went forward into the fight. What happened next would earn him the first Medal of Honor awarded to any American soldier in World War II. Nininger engaged Japanese forces at close range, hand-to-hand fighting. He forced his way into enemy positions repeatedly, killed enemy soldiers with rifle fire and grenades. He was wounded. He kept fighting, wounded again, kept fighting. Finally, he was hit by fire that killed him. But his actions broke the Japanese attack at that section of the line. Other defenders held because Nininger had disrupted the assault. He died doing what soldiers do, going forward when others need help, putting himself at risk to protect his unit, using his weapon to maximum effect. The weapon he carried that day was an M1 Garand. It allowed him to deliver sustained fire without pausing to work a bolt. That continuous firepower gave him the capability to hold off multiple attackers long enough to matter. Ninier was the first of 3 Philippine scouts to earn Medals of Honor on baton. Sergeant Jose Cugas of 88th Field Artillery earned his on January 6. First Lieutenant Willibald C. Bienca of 40th Infantry earned his on February 3. All 3 citations describe actions where soldiers moved forward under fire, engaged enemy forces aggressively, and delivered effective fire despite being wounded or outnumbered. The pattern was consistent. These were professional soldiers who knew how to fight. They had weapons that let them fight effectively. They used those weapons to maximum capability. The Japanese noticed the firepower difference immediately. Combat reports from Japanese units in January mentioned unexpectedly heavy automatic weapons fire from American positions. Intelligence officers noted that single American soldiers appeared to be delivering fire consistent with light machine guns. Unit commanders reported difficulty advancing against what they described as concentrated automatic fire from positions that appeared lightly defended. The reports were confused. Japanese intelligence knew Americans used Springfield bolt-action rifles as standard issue. That was documented, confirmed from earlier combat. But something had changed. American firepower had increased dramatically. Where was it coming from? By mid-January, Japanese forces had captured enough M1 Garands from battlefield losses to examine them. They sent several rifles back to Japan for detailed analysis. Engineers at Yokosuka Naval Arsenal disassembled the weapons, studied the operating system, measured components. Their conclusion was straightforward. The M1 was a well-designed semi-automatic rifle, gas-operated, reliable, capable of sustained rapid fire, and probably impossible for Japan to manufacture without completely retooling factories. The Japanese industrial base was set up for bolt-action rifles, machine guns, and artillery. Semi-automatic rifles had never been a priority. Now they were fighting an enemy where every infantryman had firepower equivalent to specialized weapons teams. The strategic implications were obvious. Japanese commanders tried to adapt tactics, avoid prolonged firefights with American positions, use artillery and mortars to suppress defenders from distance, then assault quickly before they could recover, minimize exposure to American rifle fire. The adjustments helped, but didn't solve the fundamental problem. In straight infantry engagements at close range, Americans had a firepower advantage. Japanese forces needed numerical superiority or artillery support or terrain advantage to compensate. By April, the situation on Bataan had deteriorated beyond recovery. Food was exhausted. Ammunition was critically low. Disease had incapacitated thousands. The Japanese had reinforcements. The Americans had nothing. No supplies, no reinforcements, no hope of relief. The naval blockade was complete. On April 9, Major General Edward P. King surrendered American and Filipino forces on Bataan. 76,000 men became prisoners of war, approximately 16,000 Americans, 60,000 Filipinos. Most still carried Springfield rifles. The soldiers with Garands had fought until their ammunition was gone. Some destroyed their rifles before surrendering. Smashed actions, bent barrels, made sure the Japanese couldn't use them. What followed was one of the worst atrocities in modern warfare, the Bataan Death March. Japanese forces marched 76,000 prisoners 65 miles up the Bataan Peninsula in tropical heat. No food, no water, no medical care. Guards beat prisoners, shot those who fell, bayonet those who stopped for water. Between 7,000 and 10,000 men died on the march. Another 26,000 died at Camp O'Donnell over the next 8 months. Starvation, disease, brutal conditions. The Philippine scouts who survived the march continued to demonstrate the discipline that defined them as soldiers. They helped each other, picked up those who fell, shared what little they had. Many escaped and joined guerrilla forces to continue fighting. Philip Fry survived the Bataan Death March and 3.5 years in Japanese prison camps. He was liberated in August 1945 and returned to the United States. He lived until July 22, 1959. His assessment of the M1 Garand's combat effectiveness became one of the most cited testimonials about the weapon beyond my descriptive powers. That phrase captured what was difficult to quantify: the psychological impact of sustained fire, the confidence it gave defenders, the fear it created in attackers. Numbers could show rate of fire differences, 40 shots per minute versus 15. But numbers couldn't capture what it meant to be a soldier holding ground against superior numbers and knowing your weapon could deliver continuous fire without pause. By late 1942, M1 production in the United States had finally reached levels needed to equip entire divisions. The 164th Infantry Regiment, North Dakota National Guard, part of the American Division, arrived on Guadalcanal on October 13, 1942, carrying M1 Garands as standard issue. The regiment consisted of approximately 3,000 men, mostly from North Dakota, with additional soldiers from other states. Almost every rifleman in the regiment carried an M1. The few who didn't carry M1 carbines or specialized weapons like the Browning automatic rifle. This was the first time an entire United States Army regiment landed in combat with semi-automatic rifles as standard issue. The Marines on Guadalcanal had been fighting since August 7 with primarily Springfield bolt actions. The 1st Marine Division had landed with M1903 rifles as their standard weapon. Some specialized units had M1S, defense battalions, some artillery units, small numbers, and headquarters companies. But the infantry regiments doing the actual jungle fighting had Springfields. They had been requesting Garands for months. The Marine Corps had officially adopted the M1 in June 1942, but distribution was slow. Rifles went to units training in the United States first. Units already deployed overseas got them last. When the 164th Infantry landed on October 13, Marines immediately noticed what the Army soldiers were carrying: new rifles, semi-automatic, 8 rounds, fast reload. The Marines had been fighting for 2 months with bolt actions. They knew what combat on Guadalcanal required: jungle fighting, close range engagements, ambushes, night attacks, situations where a rate of fire mattered more than long-range precision. The Garand was perfect for that kind of fighting. The Springfield was not. Marine units began acquiring M1s through unofficial channels. The Marines had a long tradition of procuring equipment through creative means. If another service had something you needed and you could obtain it without getting caught, you obtained it. M1 Garands fell into that category. Some Marines traded for them a bottle of captured Japanese sake for a rifle, a Japanese battle flag for a rifle, personal items, souvenirs, anything that might convince an Army soldier to part with his weapon. Most Army soldiers weren't willing to trade. Their rifles were important. They needed them for combat. But some traded anyway, usually soldiers in rear echelon units who didn't expect to see combat and wanted souvenirs more than rifles. The trades were technically unauthorized. Both the soldier giving up his rifle and the Marine receiving it were violating
Regulations. But regulations seemed less important than practical needs in combat zones.
Other Marines simply took rifles when opportunities presented themselves. If an Army soldier set down his gerund and walked away, a Marine might pick it up. If a supply crate was unguarded, rifles might disappear. The practice became common enough that Army officers started posting guards on supply areas specifically to prevent Marine acquisition. That didn't stop it entirely. Marines found ways. They were resourceful. They wanted those rifles. They were willing to work for them. The situation created some friction between Army and Marine units, but it was mostly good-natured. Both services respected each other's fighting abilities. Marines envied the Army's equipment. Army soldiers respected the Marines' fighting record on Guadalcanal. The rifle acquisitions were more like friendly competition than actual theft. Army units tried to keep the rifles. Marines tried to acquire them. Both sides understood the game. When the 1st Marine Division prepared to leave Del Canal in December, word came down that all M1 Garands had to be returned to Army units. The rifles were Army property. They needed to stay with Army units on the island. Marine commanders informed their men all Garands were to be turned in before embarking on ships. Army officers would be stationed at embarkation points to collect rifles and issue receipts. Many Marines reluctantly returned their Garands. They turned them in, got receipts, boarded ships carrying Springfield bolt actions again. But some Marines managed to keep their M1s. Anyway, they smuggled them aboard ships in duffel bags wrapped in ponchos hidden in equipment. Some Marines cooperated with sympathetic Army soldiers who looked the other way during inspections. Some simply walked aboard, carrying their rifles openly, and nobody questioned them. Estimates vary, but probably several hundred Garands left Guadalcanal with the 1st Marine Division despite official efforts to recover them. Those rifles were carried to subsequent battles in the Solomons. The 164th Infantry's commander was Colonel Bryant E. Moore. He understood the M1's value immediately. Moore told his soldiers to train with their rifles constantly. Fire fast, reload fast, trust the weapon. When the regiment went into combat, Moore's men applied the same principles that it had worked on. Baton, sustained fire, continuous pressure, overwhelming firepower from individual riflemen. The Japanese faced the same problem they had encountered in the Philippines. American infantry who could fire as fast as machine guns. Japanese charges that should have succeeded based on experience against bolt-action rifles failed against. Corporal Kenneth S. Fubber of the 164th Infantry became the first United States Army soldier to die in offensive combat operations in the Pacific Theater after Pearl Harbor. He was killed on October 13, 1942, the day his regiment landed on Guadalcanal. Japanese aircraft bombed the landing area. Shrapnel struck Fubber as he came ashore. He died on the beach. Thousands of Army soldiers had died in defensive operations in the Philippines from December 1941 to May 1942. But Fubber was the first killed during an American offensive operation. His death marked the beginning of America's ground offensive in the Pacific. By November 1942, American intelligence began receiving reports from captured Japanese soldiers describing their experiences facing M1 Garands. The reports were remarkably consistent. Japanese prisoners described American rifle fire as resembling automatic weapons. They said individual American soldiers delivered sustained fire that couldn't possibly come from manually operated rifles. When interrogators showed them M1s and explained they were semi-automatic rifles, not machine guns, many prisoners were surprised. They had assumed they were facing specialized automatic weapons, not standard issue rifles. These interrogation reports reached higher command levels. They were compiled into assessments of American weapons' effectiveness. The conclusions validated what frontline units already knew. The M1 Garand gave American infantry a decisive firepower advantage in close combat. That advantage saved lives. It won engagements. It compensated for numerical disadvantages. The rifle worked in mud, in sand, in jungle humidity, in Arctic cold. Soldiers learned to trust it completely. General George S. Patton commanded armored and infantry forces across North
Africa, Sicily, France, and Germany. He was famously difficult to impress. Equipment had to succeed, soldiers had to fight. Patton didn't tolerate incompetence or equipment failure. On January 26,
1945, Patton wrote to Major General Lean H. Campbell, Jr., Chief of Ordnance. The letter praised the M1 Garand. "In my opinion, the M1 rifle is the greatest battle implement ever devised." That assessment came from direct observation. Patton had watched his soldiers fight across 2 theaters. He knew what weapons worked. The Garand worked. It gave American infantry an edge that German forces couldn't match. Patton made sure his units had Garands and knew how to use them properly.
Maximum rate
of fire, aggressive tactics, overwhelming the enemy with firepower.
German soldiers who faced American infantry in Europe noticed the same firepower disparity Japanese soldiers had noticed in the Pacific. German
infantry carried CAR 98 KO rifles, bolt action, 5 rounds, excellent weapons for precision shooting, but slow in close combat.
When American infantry closed to 200 yards and started firing Garands, German soldiers couldn't match the volume of fire. German after-action reports from Normandy describe American suppression fire as intense. Individual American riflemen could pin down entire German squads. German tactical doctrine
relied heavily on MG-42 machine guns, 1 or 2 machine guns per squad providing suppression while riflemen maneuvered.
But American squads didn't need to rely entirely on machine guns. Every rifleman had semi-automatic capability that spread suppression across the entire squad.
Even if the machine gunner was killed, 7 or 8 men with Garands
could maintain fire.
By 1944, the M1 Garand had become the symbol of American
infantry. When soldiers landed at Normandy, they carried Garands.
When Marines assaulted Tarawa, Saipan, Palau,
Guayma, Okinawa, they carried Garands.
The rifle performed reliably across
every environment: desert heat, jungle humidity, European winter.
It functioned in conditions that stopped other
weapons:
mud, sand, saltwater, snow. Soldiers maintained their rifles as best they could under combat conditions. The rifles kept working.
Total M1 Garand
production during World War II reached approximately 5.4 million rifles.
Springfield Armory in Winchester. Repeating arms built them as fast as production capacity allowed. By 1945, virtually every American infantry unit in both theaters carried M1s as standard issue.
The Springfield bolt action had been relegated to sniper rifles and
training weapons. The transition was complete.
American infantry fought with semi-automatic rifles.
That gave them an
advantage no other major combatant possessed at that scale.
The Japanese finally attempted to produce their own semi-automatic rifle in 1944. The Imperial Japanese Navy took the lead. Because they controlled facilities capable of precision manufacturing, the decision to develop a semi-automatic
rifle came from direct combat experience.
By 1943, Japanese commanders throughout the Pacific had submitted reports describing American firepower superiority. Those reports were remarkably consistent. American infantry delivered sustained fire that Japanese infantry couldn't match. In close combat
engagements, American soldiers could fire 2 to 3 times as many rounds as Japanese soldiers in the same time.
Period.
That firepower advantage was decisive. Japanese attacks that should have succeeded based on numerical superiority were failing because American defenders could deliver enough fire to stop them.
Japanese military
planners faced a difficult decision. They could continue producing bolt-action rifles using existing factories and tooling, or they could invest in developing and producing semi-automatic rifles.
The first option was cheaper and faster, but left Japanese infantries at a permanent disadvantage. The second option would
take years and require retooling factories that were already operating at maximum capacity, producing weapons for
the ongoing war.
The Imperial Japanese Navy chose to proceed with semi-automatic rifle development.
The Navy had more control over its weapons procurement than the Army did. The Navy also had access to Yokosuka Naval Arsenal, one of Japan's most advanced manufacturing facilities. Yokosuka had precision machine tools and skilled workers capable of handling complex designs. Engineers at Yokosuka Naval
Arsenal studied captured M1 Garands extensively. They disassembled them completely, measured every component,
analyzed the metallurgy, examined the gas operating system in detail. They concluded that directly copying the M1 was not feasible. The ANBL's clip system that worked well with American 306 ammunition didn't work reliably with Japanese 7.7mm ammunition. The cartridge dimensions were slightly different.
The clip wouldn't feed properly, attempting to rechamber.
Captured M1s for Japanese ammunition resulted in feeding failures and jams.
The solution was to develop a modified
design. The Type 4 rifle would copy the M1's gas operating system, its rotating bolt, and its overall operating principle, but the magazine would be different. Instead of an 8-round en-bloc clip, the Type 4 would use a
fixed internal 10-round magazine fed by 2 standard 5-round stripper clips. This allowed the use of existing
ammunition clips already in production for Type 99 Arisaka rifles.
It also solved the feeding problems that plagued
attempts to use en-bloc clips with Japanese ammunition. Development of the Type 4 began in early 1944.
The first prototypes were hand-built and tested extensively. Engineers refined the design based on test results.
By late 1944, the design was finalized and production tooling was being manufactured. Production began in earnest in early 1945.
Yokosuka produced approximately 250 Type 4 rifles by
August 1945 when Japan surrendered.
Another 100 rifles were partially assembled, waiting for final components.
Parts for several hundred more rifles were in various stages of manufacture. The rifles never saw combat. They remained in storage at Yokosuka until American occupation forces arrived in September 1945. American weapons experts
examined the Type 4 rifles with interest. They recognized the design as a clear derivative of the M1 Garand. The operating system was nearly identical.
The quality of manufacturer was good. The rifles functioned reliably in testing.
If Japan had been able to produce them earlier and in larger quantities, they might have narrowed the firepower gap that American forces exploited throughout the Pacific War.
But by the time Japan could manufacture semi-automatic rifles, the outcome of the war was already determined. The program came too late to matter. The M1 Garand remained in American service until 1957.
It fought in Korea with the same effectiveness it had shown in World
War II. When North Korean forces invaded South Korea on June 25, 1950, American units deployed to stop them carried M1s as standard issue. The rifle performed just as reliably in Korea as it had in the Philippines, Guadalcanal, North Africa, Sicily, France, and Germany.
Korea presented different challenges
than World War II.
The terrain was mountainous. Winters were brutal. Temperatures dropped to 20 below zero
Fahrenheit in some areas. Many weapons failed in extreme cold. Lubricants froze. Action ceased, but the M1 kept
functioning when properly maintained.
During the Battle of Chosin Reservoir in late 1950, temperatures reached US 30° F.
Marines and Army soldiers found that standard lubricants thickened and gummed up in the extreme cold.
The solution was to remove all lubricant from the rifles and run them dry.
Without oil, the metal-to-metal contact created more wear, but the rifles continued to function.
The M1's design was robust enough to operate without lubrication in emergency situations.
American infantry in Korea maintained firepower superiority over Chinese and North Korean forces.
Chinese
soldiers were armed primarily with bolt-action rifles, submachine guns, and captured Japanese weapons.
North Korean
forces used Soviet-supplied weapons,
mostly Mosin-Nagant bolt-action rifles and PPSH submachine guns.
Neither side had semi-automatic rifles issued at the scale American forces did.
In firefights, American soldiers could deliver sustained, accurate fire that enemy forces couldn't match. The firepower advantage that had worked in World War II continued working in Korea. Chinese tactics in Korea relied heavily on mass assaults, human wave attacks, hundreds or thousands of soldiers attacking at night, using darkness and numbers to overwhelm positions. The attacks were terrifying and often effective,
but they were also costly.
American defenders with M1s could deliver devastating fire into mass formations. One rifle firing 40 rounds per minute was effective.
A squad of 8 men firing simultaneously was overwhelming.
A company of 150 men
created an impenetrable wall of fire.
Chinese forces took horrific casualties in these assaults, but they kept
attacking because their tactical doctrine emphasized overwhelming defenders through sheer numbers and accepting heavy losses to achieve
objectives.
The M1 proved especially valuable in the defensive battles that characterized much of the Korean War. American and United Nations forces often found themselves defending hills or ridgeal lines against numerically superior Chinese or North Korean attacks. Defenders with M1s could inflict casualties at rates that made assaults prohibitively expensive.
The rifle's sustained fire capability allowed soldiers to engage multiple targets rapidly without pausing to work bolts. In night attacks, when
visibility was limited and targets appeared suddenly at close range, that rapid fire capability was decisive.
In
1957, the M14 replaced the M1 Garand as standard United States military issue.
The M14 was essentially an improved Garand selective fire capability. Detachable 20-round magazine, but the same basic gas operating system. John C. Garand himself worked on the M14 design team.
The rifle that replaced his original design was built on principles he had established in the 1930s.
The concept of giving every infantryman semi-automatic or automatic firepower
had proven so effective that it became the standard worldwide. Today, every modern military uses rifles that fire
semi-automatically or automatically.
The idea of equipping infantry with bolt-action rifles as primary weapons is
obsolete. That obsolescence began with the M1 Garand.
John Kennedy Garand was
born in Quebec in 1888. He immigrated to the United States at age 11 with his family.
They settled in Connecticut, where Garand worked in textile mills as a young man. He showed early aptitude for mechanical design and taught himself
engineering through observation and practice.
He studied machinery, took things apart to understand how they
worked, rebuilt them with improvements.
By his 20s, Garand had developed a reputation as a skilled machinist and
designer. The United States Army was looking for a semi-automatic rifle in the early 1920s. Multiple designers submitted proposals.
The Army wanted a rifle that could fire rapidly without manual operation between shots, but that
would also be reliable, accurate, and simple enough for mass production. Garand submitted his first design in
1920. It didn't win the competition, but it showed promise. The Army invited him to continue development.
Garand joined Springfield Armory in 1919 as a civilian designer. For the next 17 years, he refined his semi-automatic rifle design.
The technical challenges were substantial. A semi-automatic rifle had to capture some of the propellant gases from firing and use that energy to operate the action automatically.
The
gas had to be directed through a port in the barrel, push a piston or operating rod backward, unlock the bolt, extract the spent cartridge, the hammer, compress a spring, then let the spring push everything forward again to chamber
a new round. All of this had to happen in a fraction of a second reliably.
Thousands of times in all conditions.
Garand tested multiple gas operating systems. He tried different port
locations, different rod designs, different bolt mechanisms. Each iteration was built by hand, tested
extensively, then refined based on results. The development process was methodical and time-consuming.
By the early 1930s, Garand had settled on a gas port system located near the muzzle.
Gas tapped from the barrel pushed an operating rod backward under the barrel.
The rod was connected to a rotating bolt. As the rod moved back, it rotated the bolt to unlock it, then extracted
the spent cartridge.
A spring compressed during the rearward movement.
When the spring pushed forward, it chambered a
new round and rotated the bolt to lock it.
The ammunition feeding system took years to develop.
Early designs used detachable box magazines, but Army Ordnance Department officials objected.
They believed detachable magazines would be easily lost by soldiers in combat.
They wanted a fixed internal magazine.
Garand developed the unblock clip system. 8 rounds were loaded into a metal clip. The entire clip was inserted into the magazine from the top.
The clip stayed inside the rifle until all 8 rounds were fired, then ejected.
automatically. The system was elegant and simple. It allowed for fast reloading and kept the magazine internal. As ordnance wanted, the M1 Garand was officially adopted by the United States Army in January 1936.
Production began slowly at Springfield Armory.
Each rifle required extensive machining. Components had to be manufactured to tight tolerances.
The gas system had to be precisely tuned.
Early production was maybe a few hundred
rifles per month.
As workers gained experience and tooling improved, production increased.
By 1938, Springfield was producing several thousand M1s per month.
When the Army finally adopted Garand's rifle, he
received no royalties. As a government employee working at a government facility, all his designs belonged to the
United States. The patent was issued in the government's name. Garand never became wealthy from the rifle that bore his name.
He continued working at Springfield Armory, refining the design, solving problems that emerged during
production and field use. He worked on other projects, too. He helped develop the M14 rifle that would eventually replace the M1. He retired from Springfield Armory in 1953 after 34 years of service and lived quietly in Massachusetts until his death on February 16, 1974 at age 86. Garand's
obituary mentioned his work on the M1, but didn't emphasize the rifle's impact on military history.
That impact became clearer over time. Military historians studying World War II consistently cite the M1 Garand as one of the critical
advantages American forces possessed, not because it made soldiers better fighters, but because it let them fight
more effectively.
Courage and training matter, but tools matter, too.
The Garand
was a better tool than anything Axis powers fielded at comparable scale. That simple fact cascaded across thousands of
engagements. It shifted odds in countless firefights.
It saved lives. It contributed measurably to Allied victory. The lesson from the Garand's development and deployment is straightforward. Technology matters in combat. The side with better tools has an advantage that training and courage
alone cannot overcome.
Japanese and German soldiers were brave, disciplined, well-trained.
Many were veterans of
years of combat.
They knew their weapons, they knew their tactics,
they fought skillfully and courageously, but American soldiers carried rifles that fired as fast as they could pull the trigger while their opponents had to
manually cycle bolts between shots.
That mechanical advantage shifted the balance of countless engagements.
The Garand didn't eliminate danger. Combat remained deadly.
Soldiers with M1s were killed by enemy fire, artillery mortars, grenades, and all the other hazards of war. The rifle did not render anyone invincible, but it provided American soldiers significantly better odds in direct firefights. Better odds meant more troops survived, more engagements were successfully won, and more objectives were achieved. Over the course of a conflict involving millions of soldiers and thousands of battles, those incremental advantages accumulated into substantial strategic consequences. Consider the numbers. In a typical infantry firefight at 200 yards, a soldier armed with a Springfield bolt-action rifle might fire 15 aim shots per minute, whereas a soldier with an M1 Garand could fire 40.
Not quite triple, but close.
In a 10-minute engagement, that equates to 150 rounds versus 400. Now scale that across a squad of 8, a platoon of 40, or a company of 150, the disparity in firepower becomes overwhelming. Defenders could engage more targets, suppress more enemy positions, and maintain fire even during counterattacks. The cumulative effect reshaped how battles unfolded. Enemy commanders noticed this repeatedly. German after-action reports from Normandy described American suppression fire as far heavier than expected given unit size. Japanese officers in the Pacific made similar observations.
Soviet analysts studying American tactics recognized the firepower advantage the M1 rifle provided. The weapon became an integral part of American tactical doctrine.
Infantry assaults relied on sustained suppressive fire to pin defenders while maneuver elements advanced, and defensive positions depended on rapid, continuous fire to disrupt attacks before they gained momentum. All of this was possible because the standard infantry rifle could fire rapidly without manual operation. The strategic ramifications extended beyond individual battles. American forces could adopt more aggressive tactics because of their firepower edge. Commanders could commit smaller forces to operations that would otherwise require larger contingents with inferior weapons. Logistics were simplified as fewer soldiers achieved the same effects.
and casualty rates were reduced because firefights concluded more quickly with less exposure to enemy fire.
These advantages compounded across campaigns. The M1 Garand was one factor among many contributing to Allied victory, but it was a decisive one. The rifle also influenced post-war military doctrine globally. After 1945, every major military initiated programs to develop or adopt semi-automatic or automatic infantry rifles. The Soviet Union, which had already deployed the SKS semi-automatic carbine during the war, continued development of automatic weapons. Britain developed the EM-2 rifle and later adopted the L1A1. France introduced the MAS-49. Germany eventually produced the G3. Every nation recognized that the era of bolt-action infantry rifles had ended. The American M1 demonstrated that semi-automatic rifles were practical, reliable, and markedly superior in combat. That lesson was absorbed by military planners worldwide. Between 1937 and 1945, 5.4 million M1 Garand rifles were manufactured, carried by millions of soldiers across every theater of World War II. They delivered firepower that transformed infantry combat. The semi-automatic rifle became standard, the bolt-action rifle became obsolete. The weapon that drove this transformation, that proved the concept under combat conditions in every environment, was the M1 Garand, a rifle designed by an immigrant engineer from Quebec, built by American workers in Massachusetts and Connecticut, carried by American troops from Manila to Berlin. This rifle provided every infantryman firepower that earlier generations had reserved for machine gun crews, distributing lethal capability across the entire line. It functioned in all conditions, under fire, under pressure, when lives depended on it.
The M1 Garand worked. That simple fact saved thousands of American lives and fundamentally reshaped modern warfare.